A lonely widow took in an orphan, never suspecting the child was the key to unlocking her past. That's what Margaret Winters told herself each morning as she stared at the newspaper clipping she'd saved, how a simple act of kindness had shattered 30 years of carefully constructed walls. The faded headlines seemed to whisper to her from across her empty kitchen table, a reminder of how drastically life could change with a single decision. Margaret's fingers trembled slightly as she folded the clipping and tucked it back into the drawer where she kept her important papers. The December morning pressed cold fingers against her windows, mirroring the chill that had settled in her chest years ago. Outside, snow drifted soundlessly past her farmhouse, coating the rural Pennsylvania landscape in pristine white that only emphasized her isolation. 67 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands marked by decades of hard work, Margaret had grown accustomed to silence. 15 years a widow, she moved through her days with mechanical precision, tending to her small garden in warmer months, preserving fruits and vegetables, maintaining the old farmhouse that had been in her husband Robert's family for generations. The locals in the small town of Millfield knew her as the quiet widow who kept to herself. Few remembered the younger Margaret, the one who laughed easily, who taught second grade at the local elementary school, whose eyes sparkled when she looked at her husband. That woman had disappeared the day they buried Robert, victim of a sudden heart attack at 52. What no one in town knew, what Margaret herself had pushed down so deep it rarely surfaced even in her dreams, was the other loss that had shaped her, the one that came before Robert's death, the one she never spoke of. She methodically prepared her breakfast: 1 egg, a single slice of toast, a small cup of black coffee. The routine never varied, like so many aspects of her carefully controlled life. The radio provided background noise, the weatherman cheerfully predicting more snow throughout the week. Margaret barely registered the forecast. The weather made little difference to her days. The telephone's sharp ring sliced through the kitchen's stillness, causing her to flinch. Margaret rarely received calls, especially this early. Her heart quickened with the instinctive fear that unexpected communications brought. News was rarely good in her experience. "Hello?" Her voice sounded rusty, even to her own ears. "Margaret, it's Ellen Simmons from church." Margaret relaxed slightly. Ellen was one of the few people she maintained any relationship with, though relationship might be too strong a word. Ellen coordinated the church charity work and occasionally convinced Margaret to bake something for fundraisers. "Good morning, Ellen. I'm sorry to call so early, but we have a situation I thought you might be able to help with." Ellen's voice carried the gentle but determined tone she used when asking for volunteers. "There's a child, a little girl, 10 years old. Her name is Lily." Margaret felt a tightening in her chest. "What about her?" "She's temporarily in the foster system. Her mother died 3 months ago, cancer, and there's no father in the picture. She was staying with her grandmother, but the poor woman had a stroke last week and will be in rehabilitation for quite some time." "That's unfortunate," Margaret said carefully, "but I don't see how The social services are overwhelmed, especially with the holidays coming. They need emergency placement for her, just for a few weeks, until after New Year's when they can find something more permanent." "Ellen, surely there are families better suited." "Everyone's full up or traveling for the holidays," Ellen continued, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "You have that big house all to yourself, and you were a teacher, Margaret. You're good with children." Margaret corrected. "I was good with children, a long time ago." A heavy silence filled the line before Ellen spoke again, her voice softer. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. She's a sweet girl, quiet, no trouble, and it's just temporary." Margaret glanced around her kitchen. Spotless, ordered, empty. The thought of disrupting her carefully maintained solitude made her stomach knot. But something else stirred beneath the resistance, something she couldn't immediately identify. "Just until after New Year's?" Margaret finally asked. "That's what they're saying. 3 weeks, maybe 4 at most?" Margaret closed her eyes. An image flashed in her mind, a small bedroom upstairs that remained firmly shut, untouched for decades. She quickly pushed the thought away. "I'll need to get some things." "If she's coming," Margaret said, surprising herself almost as much as she surely surprised Ellen. "Oh, that's wonderful. I can bring her by this afternoon around 3. That will give you time to prepare." After hanging up, Margaret stood motionless in her kitchen. What had she just agreed to? A child, in her home. Her ordered, quiet existence would be upended. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a flutter of real panic. She moved through the house with uncharacteristic indecision. The guest room hadn't been used in years, but it was at least free of dust thanks to her rigorous cleaning routines. The room was impersonal, beige walls, plain curtains, a simple dresser and bed, but it would have to do. As Margaret changed the sheets, plumping pillows that hadn't cradled a head in over a decade, she steadfastly avoided looking at the closed door across the hall. Some spaces remained sealed off, not just in her house but in her heart. This temporary arrangement wouldn't change that. Couldn't change that. By the time 3 o'clock approached, Margaret had worked herself into a state of nervous energy. She'd gone to the store, awkwardly selecting foods she thought a child might eat, realizing how little she knew about modern children's preferences. She'd found an old checkerboard in the attic, dusted some books that might be appropriate for a 10-year-old. Each action felt foreign, as though she were playing a role she'd forgotten the lines to. When the doorbell rang, Margaret smoothed her hands down her skirt, took a deep breath, and opened the door to find Ellen standing beside a small figure bundled against the cold. "Margaret, this is Lily," Ellen said, her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Lily, this is Mrs. Winters. She's going to let you stay with her for a little while." The child looked up, and Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Lily was small for 10, with a solemn face framed by dark hair that fell in untidy waves to her shoulders. But it was her eyes that caught Margaret's attention, large, deep brown, and holding a weariness no child should possess. They were eyes that had seen too much loss too soon. "Hello," Lily said quietly, her voice barely audible above the winter wind. "Hello, Lily," Margaret replied, stepping back to allow them entry. Ellen bustled in, carrying a small suitcase and a backpack. "This is everything she has at the moment. Her grandmother's house is being maintained, but most of her things are still there." Margaret nodded, watching as Lily carefully removed her boots and lined them up neatly by the door. There was a precision to her movements that spoke of a child who had learned to navigate carefully in adult spaces. "Would you like to see where you'll be sleeping?" Margaret asked. Lily nodded, following Margaret up the stairs without a word. Ellen trailed behind, filling the silence with cheerful observations about the house and assurances that Lily would be comfortable here. Neither Margaret nor Lily responded much, creating an awkward trio as they entered the guest room. "It's not much," Margaret said, "but it's warm and quiet." "It's nice," Lily said, setting her backpack on the bed. "Thank you for letting me stay." The politeness, so adult and measured, made something twist in Margaret's heart. She recognized it, the careful gratitude of someone who'd learned not to expect much. Ellen stayed only long enough to provide Margaret with contact information and a few more details about Lily's situation before making her departure, promising to check in regularly. As the door closed behind her, Margaret and Lily stood in the foyer, the silence between them expanding into every corner of the house. "Are you hungry?" Margaret finally asked. "I made some soup for dinner." "A little," Lily admitted. They moved to the kitchen where Margaret ladled vegetable soup into bowls, cut thick slices of the bread she'd baked that morning, and set the table for two, an arrangement so unfamiliar it felt almost dreamlike. Lily sat where Margaret indicated, her feet dangling above the floor. "Do you have any questions for me?" Margaret asked as they began to eat. "About the house or anything else?" Lily looked thoughtful. "Are there rules I should know?" The question, so practical and mature, caught Margaret off guard. "Rules? Well, I suppose. Keep your room tidy. Let me know if you need anything. Don't go outside alone in this weather." She paused. "The door across from your room stays closed?" "It's not to be opened." Lily nodded seriously, accepting this boundary without question. "I understand." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional creak of the old house settling against the cold. "This soup is good," Lily offered quietly. "My mom used to make soup when it snowed." It was the first personal information she'd volunteered, and Margaret treaded carefully. "Did she? What kind did she make?" "Chicken noodle. With extra carrots because those were my favorite part." Margaret nodded. "Carrots were always my favorite too." A ghost of a smile touched Lily's lips before disappearing. They finished their meal, and Margaret showed Lily how to work the television in the living room while she cleaned up the kitchen. From the doorway, she watched the small figure curled on one end of the sofa, looking somehow both present and absent at once. That night, after showing Lily the bathroom routine and saying an awkward goodnight, Margaret sat on the edge of her bed and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The house felt different already, the air disturbed by the presence of another heartbeat. She wasn't prepared for this, not just the practical aspects of having a child in her home, but the emotions stirred by those solemn brown eyes. Margaret slept fitfully, waking several times to listen for sounds in the unfamiliar silence. Just before dawn, she thought she heard a soft crying from across the hall, but when she rose and stood outside Lily's door, there was only silence. Whether the child had quieted herself or Margaret had imagined it, she couldn't tell. Either possibility caused an ache in her chest. The morning brought gray skies and more snow. Margaret rose early as usual, moving quietly through her morning routine before starting breakfast. She was beating eggs when she sensed rather than heard Lily's presence. "Good morning," Margaret said, turning to find the girl standing in the doorway, already dressed in jeans and a faded purple sweater. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Lily answered, the polite response automatic rather than truthful. "I'm making scrambled eggs and toast. Is that all right?" Lily nodded, moving to the table. "Can I help?" "You could set the table. Plates are in that cabinet, silverware in the drawer below." They worked in parallel, the silence between them not exactly comfortable but less strained than the previous evening. As they sat down to eat, Margaret considered what to do with a child all day in a house ill-equipped for entertainment. "I thought perhaps we could go into town later," she said. "If the roads are clear. You'll need some things, I expect." "I don't need much," Lily said quickly. "Even so. Ellen mentioned your things are still at your grandmother's house. You might need some extra clothes. And perhaps we could find a book or two you'd enjoy." Lily's expression brightened slightly at the mention of books. "I like reading. Do you?" "What sorts of books do you like?" "Stories about animals. And mysteries." She hesitated. "My mom was reading The Secret Garden to me before she got too sick. We almost finished it." Margaret felt a tightness in her throat. "That was one of my favorites when I was about your age. I think I still have a copy somewhere." After breakfast, while Margaret called the plow service to check on the roads, Lily wandered into the living room. When Margaret joined her a few minutes later, she found the girl standing before the mantelpiece, studying the few photographs displayed there. "Is this your husband?" Lily asked, pointing to a picture of Robert. "Yes. His name was Robert. He died 15 years ago. My mom has been gone for 3 months and 12 days, Lily said matter-of-factly. "Does it stop hurting after 15 years? The question, so direct and yet so profound, left Margaret momentarily speechless. "It changes," she finally said. "The hurt becomes different. Less sharp maybe, but still there." Lily nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Her gaze moved to another photograph, one showing a much younger Margaret and Robert standing in front of the farmhouse, paint-spattered and smiling. "You look happy there." "We were," Margaret said softly. "We'd just bought this house. It needed a lot of work then." "Did you have children?" Lily asked, her eyes still on the photographs. Margaret felt the familiar constriction in her chest, the tightening that came whenever the question arose. "No," she said, the single syllable closing the door on further conversation. "The roads should be clear soon. We can go to town after lunch." If Lily noticed the abrupt change of subject, she didn't comment. She simply turned away from the photographs and asked if she could look at the books on the shelves in the corner. The trip to town later that afternoon marked Margaret's first real outing with Lily. The child was quiet in the car, watching the snow-covered landscape pass with solemn interest. In town, Margaret steered them first to the department store, where she awkwardly helped Lily select some additional clothes, practical items like warm sweaters, thick socks, and a new winter coat to replace her too small one. "This is too much," Lily protested as Margaret added gloves and a scarf to their purchases. "Nonsense. Winter's barely started, and yours are worn through at the fingers." Margaret's tone brooked no argument, and Lily fell silent, though her fingers kept returning to stroke the soft blue scarf with something like wonder. At the bookstore, Lily came alive in a way Margaret hadn't yet seen. Her steps quickened as they moved through the aisles, her eyes widening at the displays. When Margaret told her she could select 3 books, the girl's face transformed with a joy so pure it created an answering warmth in Margaret's chest. Lily took her time, carefully examining options before making her selections. A mystery featuring a young detective, a novel about a girl who could talk to animals, and, to Margaret's surprise, a collection of poetry. "You like poetry?" Margaret asked as they stood at the counter. Lily nodded. "My teacher read us poems sometimes. I like how they sound, like music made of words. On the drive home, with packages tucked securely in the back seat, Lily seemed more relaxed, less the careful, contained child of the previous day. As they passed the town's small park, she pressed her face closer to the window. "Look at the cardinals," she said, pointing to a flash of red against the snow. "My mom always said when you see a cardinal, it's someone you've lost coming to say hello." Margaret's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "Is that so? Do you think it's true?" The question hung in the air between them. Margaret glanced at the earnest face turned toward her, those eyes seeking reassurance she wasn't sure she could provide. "I think," Margaret said carefully, "that people find comfort in different ways. If that thought brings you comfort, then perhaps there's truth in it for you." Lily considered this, her gaze returning to the window. "I've seen 3 cardinals since Mom died. One at the funeral, one outside my grandmother's house, and now here." The simple observation, delivered without self-pity, touched something in Margaret that had been dormant for years. She found herself reaching across to briefly touch Lily's hand before returning her own to the steering wheel. "Perhaps your mother is checking on you," she said softly, "making sure you're all right." That evening, after dinner, instead of turning on the television, Margaret found herself retrieving her copy of The Secret Garden from a box in the spare room closet. When she returned to the living room, Lily looked up from her new poetry book, curiosity evident in her expression. "I found it," Margaret said, holding up the worn volume. "Would you like to continue where you and your mother left off? Or start again?" Lily's eyes widened. "You'd read it to me? If you'd like." "We were at the part where Mary finds the key to the garden," Lily said, setting aside her own book and making room on the sofa. Margaret sat down, leaving a small space between them, and opened the book. "Let me see if I can find that spot." They spent an hour with Mary Lennox and her discovery of the hidden garden. Lily listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions or commenting on the story. When Margaret finally closed the book, suggesting they continue the next evening, she noticed Lily stifling a yawn. "Time for bed, I think," Margaret said, placing a bookmark to hold their place. As they climbed the stairs together, Lily asked, "Did you read to your students when you were a teacher?" Margaret looked at her in surprise. "How did you know I was a teacher?" "Ellen mentioned it yesterday. She said you taught little kids." "Yes, 2nd grade. For many years." "Did you like it?" They had reached the top of the stairs, and Margaret paused, memories washing over her. "Very much. Children at that age are full of wonder. Everything is new to them. It was a joy to be part of that." "Why did you stop?" The question was innocent, but it probed at old wounds. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," Margaret said. "Things change." Lily accepted this vague answer, disappearing into the bathroom to brush her teeth. Later, as Margaret tucked the blankets around her, an action that felt both foreign and achingly familiar, Lily asked one more question. "Why can't I open the door across the hall?" Margaret stiffened slightly. "It's just an old room. Nothing interesting." "Is it? Was it meant to be for your children? The ones you didn't have?" The perceptiveness of the question took Margaret's breath away. For a moment she couldn't respond, caught between the instinct to deflect and an unexpected desire to answer honestly. "It's just a room that I prefer to keep closed," she finally said. "Now sleep well. We'll read more tomorrow." She turned off the light and closed the door softly behind her, standing for a moment in the hallway. Her gaze drifted to the door across from Lily's room, the door she herself hadn't opened in nearly 30 years. Behind it lay not just a room, but memories she'd locked away as surely as if they were physical objects. Over the next few days, a routine began to establish itself. Mornings were quiet, with breakfast followed by separate activities, Margaret tending to household tasks while Lily read or drew pictures. In the afternoons, they might take a short drive if the weather permitted, or bake something together in the kitchen. Evenings were for reading The Secret Garden, the story of a lonely, difficult child finding healing in an abandoned place, striking chords in both of them for different reasons. On the 5th day, a Saturday, Margaret woke to the sound of gentle tapping. For a moment she was disoriented, the noise unfamiliar in her usually silent house. Then she realized it was coming from the kitchen. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find Lily at the kitchen table, a pile of art supplies spread before her. "I hope it's okay," Lily said when she saw Margaret. "I found these in the drawer. I was making a card for my grandmother. The social worker is taking me to visit her today, remember?" Margaret did remember. Ellen had called the previous evening to arrange the visit. "Of course it's okay." she said, moving to start the coffee. "That's thoughtful of you." As Margaret prepared breakfast, she found herself watching Lily work. The girl's face was a study in concentration, her tongue caught between her teeth as she carefully colored a garden scene on the front of her handmade card. "My grandmother loves flowers," Lily explained, noticing Margaret's gaze. "She can't take care of her garden now, so I thought I'd bring the garden to her. She'll love that," Margaret said, unexpectedly touched by the child's consideration. After breakfast, as Lily went upstairs to get ready for her visit, Margaret found herself examining the art supplies the girl had been using. Old colored pencils and markers, paper that had yellowed slightly with age, all from a drawer Margaret rarely opened. School supplies she'd kept out of habit, perhaps, or an inability to discard the tools of a profession she'd loved. The social worker, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Parker, arrived promptly at 10. "We should be back around 3, she explained as Lily put on her new coat and scarf. "The rehabilitation center is about an hour away." "Take your time," Margaret said. "I'm sure your grandmother will be happy to see you," she added to Lily. Lily nodded, clutching her handmade card. "I'll tell her about the cardinal we saw." After they left, the house seemed abnormally quiet. Margaret moved through her usual Saturday chores, dusting, vacuuming, sorting laundry, but found herself working more quickly than usual, the tasks failing to fill the hours as they once had. By noon, she had completed everything she normally did and found herself at loose ends. She made a sandwich she didn't particularly want and ate half of it before wrapping the rest and putting it in the refrigerator. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed louder than usual. Almost without conscious decision, Margaret found herself climbing the stairs and stopping before the closed door across from Lily's room. Her hand hovered near the knob, trembling slightly. How long had it been since she'd entered this room? The cleaning was perfunctory, a quick dusting, the windows kept closed, the contents undisturbed. She didn't open it now either. Instead, she turned away and went to her own room, opening her closet and reaching for the high shelf where a single box was stored. She carried it to the bed and sat beside it, her hands resting on the lid for long moments before she found the courage to open it. Inside were the things she kept but couldn't bear to see daily. Photographs, a small knitted blanket, a tiny pair of booties, a journal filled with hopes and plans that had never materialized. Each item was a physical reminder of her deepest loss, the baby girl who had lived only 2 days, born too early, too fragile for this world. Elizabeth. They had named her Elizabeth. Margaret lifted the blanket she had knitted during her pregnancy, holding it against her cheek. 30 years had passed, but the softness still carried an echo of her dreams, of the nursery she and Robert had prepared with such joy, of the future that had shattered when their daughter drew her last breath in the hospital's neonatal intensive care unit. They had tried again, she and Robert, for years. But there had been no more pregnancies, no more chances. The nursery had remained closed, preserved in its readiness for a child who would never come. After Robert's death, Margaret had packed away the most personal items into this box, but she had never been able to dismantle the room itself. It stood frozen in time, a monument to what might have been. A sound from downstairs startled her, the grandfather clock in the hallway striking 2. Margaret carefully returned the items to the box, closed it, and restored it to its place on the shelf. She washed her face, erasing the evidence of tears she hadn't realized she'd shed, and went downstairs to wait for Lily's return. When the social worker's car pulled into the driveway just after 3:30, Margaret was surprised by the relief she felt. She watched through the window as Lily emerged from the back seat, her expression subdued. "Ms. Parker walked her to the door, exchanging a few words with Margaret about the visit. "Her grandmother is improving, but it will be a long recovery," the social worker explained quietly. She was very happy to see Lily, though the visit was emotional for both of them. After Ms. Parker left, Margaret found herself unsure how to approach the quiet child who now stood in the entryway, removing her coat with deliberate movements. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" Margaret finally offered. "It's quite cold out there." Lily nodded, following Margaret to the kitchen and sitting at the table while Margaret heated milk on the stove. Neither spoke until Margaret placed a steaming mug before Lily and sat down across from her with her own cup of tea. "Was it good to see your grandmother?" Margaret asked gently. "She looks different," Lily said, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug. "Smaller, and one side of her face doesn't move right. That can happen with strokes. But the doctors are helping her get better. She cried when she saw me." Lily's voice was small. I didn't want her to cry. Oh, sweetheart, Margaret said, the endearment slipping out before she could catch it. She wasn't crying because she was sad to see you. She was crying because she loves you and misses you, like how you cry sometimes when you look at the photographs in the living room. The observation struck Margaret like a physical blow. Had Lily noticed that? Had she been so transparent in her moments of remembrance? Yes, she admitted. Like that. Lily took a sip of her hot chocolate, leaving a small mustache of foam that she wiped away with the back of her hand. Ms. Parker says Grandma won't be able to take care of me even when she gets out of the hospital. She says I might have to go to a group home if they can't find a foster family soon. The matter-of-fact way she delivered this devastating news made Margaret's heart clench. I see. I don't want to go to a group home, Lily continued, still in that careful, controlled voice. But I don't want to be a bother to anyone either. You're not a bother, Lily, Margaret said firmly. The child looked up, her eyes searching Margaret's face for the truth of this statement. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slightly and returned to her hot chocolate. That night, as they continued their reading of The Secret Garden, Lily sat closer to Margaret on the sofa than she had before. When they reached the part where Mary and Colin begin to heal through their connection to the garden and each other, Lily leaned her head against Margaret's arm, just slightly, as if testing whether the contact would be allowed. Margaret found herself shifting her position to make room for the child, her arm moving almost of its own accord to wrap around Lily's small shoulders. They finished the chapter in this new configuration, both pretending that nothing significant had changed while being acutely aware of the warmth of human connection neither had experienced in too long. The following week brought a gentle shift in their interactions. The careful politeness remained, but alongside it grew moments of genuine connection. Lily began to volunteer information about her life before, stories about her mother, memories of school projects, small details that painted a picture of a happy childhood interrupted by tragedy. Margaret found herself sharing as well, mostly stories from her teaching days or anecdotes about the town's history. What she didn't share were the deeper parts of her own story. The nursery remained closed, Elizabeth's name unspoken. Yet Margaret felt the walls she had built around her grief beginning to develop hairline cracks, allowing slivers of feeling to seep through. One afternoon, as Margaret taught Lily how to make Christmas cookies using her mother-in-law's old recipe, the girl asked an unexpected question. Do you ever wish you had children, even though it might hurt to lose them? Margaret's hands stilled in the act of rolling dough. The question pierced directly to the heart of her pain, asked with such innocent directness that she couldn't deflect it. I did have a child, Lily, she said quietly, the words emerging from some deep place she rarely accessed. A little girl? But she was born too early, and she only lived for 2 days. Lily's eyes widened. What was her name? Elizabeth. Margaret's voice caught on the name. We called her Ellie. That's a pretty name, Lily said. Then, after a pause, is that why the room across from mine is closed? Was it hers? Margaret nodded, unable to speak further. To her surprise, Lily didn't press for more details or offer platitudes. Instead, she simply reached out and placed her small, flour-dusted hand over Margaret's. I bet she would have liked these cookies, Lily said simply. The unexpected comment, so childlike in its perspective yet so profound in its acceptance, broke something open in Margaret's chest. A laugh that was half sob escaped her. Yes, I think she would have. They continued making cookies, the revelation hanging in the air between them, neither heavy nor light but simply present. When they finished and the kitchen was filled with the warm scent of vanilla and cinnamon, Lily helped Margaret arrange the cookies on a plate. My mom always said food tastes better when you share it, Lily remarked. Can we take some cookies to Mrs. Jenkins next door? She was looking out her window when we drove home yesterday. The suggestion startled Margaret. Mrs. Jenkins was an elderly neighbor whom Margaret exchanged occasional pleasantries with, but had never socialized with. That's very thoughtful, Lily. Yes, we could do that. The simple act of delivering cookies to the surprised neighbor opened another small door in Margaret's closed life. Mrs. Jenkins invited them in for tea, delighted by the unexpected visit and clearly charmed by Lily. What Margaret had expected to be a brief interaction stretched into an hour of conversation, during which she learned more about her neighbor of 15 years than she had ever known before. As they walked back home through the light snow, Lily's mittened hand slipped into Margaret's. That was nice, the girl said. Mrs. Jenkins told good stories. Yes, she did. Margaret agreed, marveling at how such a simple interaction could feel so significant. That evening, Ellen called to check in, as she had been doing every few days. "How are things going?" she asked, her voice carrying its usual cheerful concern. "We're managing well," Margaret replied, surprised to realize she meant it. "Lily is—" She searched for the right words. "She's a remarkable child." "I'm so glad to hear that," Ellen said. "I knew you two would be good for each other." After some general conversation, Ellen's tone became more serious. "I spoke with Ms. Parker today. Lily's grandmother is improving, but it's clear she won't be able to take Lily back, at least not for many months, possibly longer. What will happen to her after the holidays?" Margaret asked, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "That's still being worked out. There's a family in Harrisburg who might be able to take her, but they're not available until February at the earliest. The group home is getting crowded." Margaret's mind raced. The prospect of Lily being moved to a group home or shuffled between temporary placements created an unexpected distress. "What if—" she began, then paused, uncertain of the impulse that had seized her. "What if she stayed here a bit longer? Until a good placement is found?" Ellen's surprise was evident even through the phone. "You'd be willing to do that?" "It seems easier than moving her again so soon," Margaret said, trying to sound practical rather than emotional. "We've established a routine, and the school break continues through early January. It would give the social services more time to find the right situation for her." "Margaret, that would be wonderful. I'll let Miss Parker know right away. I'm sure she'll be relieved." After hanging up, Margaret stood by the phone, somewhat stunned by her own offer. The thought of Lily leaving had created a hollow feeling she hadn't anticipated. In just over a week, the child had carved out a space in Margaret's carefully ordered existence, a space that would feel conspicuously empty when she left. Upstairs, she could hear Lily moving around in her room, preparing for bed. The sound of another person in the house, once so jarring, now felt right somehow. Margaret climbed the stairs, pausing outside Lily's door before knocking softly. "Come in," Lily called. The girl was sitting on her bed, already in pajamas, one of her new books open beside her. She looked up expectantly as Margaret entered. "I just spoke with Ellen," Margaret said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "She says your grandmother is getting better, but it will be a while before she's able to take care of you." Lily nodded, her expression carefully controlled. "Ms. Parker told me that today. They're working on finding a good family for you to stay with," Margaret continued. "But it might take a while. So I thought, if you're comfortable here, you might stay a bit longer, past New Year's until they find the right place." Lily's face brightened momentarily before she schooled her features. "I wouldn't be too much trouble?" "You're not trouble at all," Margaret said firmly. "In fact, I've enjoyed having you here." The simple admission seemed to release something in Lily. Her careful composure trembled, and for a moment, Margaret glimpsed the depth of uncertainty the child had been carrying. "I like being here," Lily whispered. "You don't make me talk when I don't want to. And you read to me like Mom did. And you make really good soup." Margaret laughed softly at the last item on the list. High praise indeed. She found herself reaching out to smooth Lily's dark hair back from her forehead, a gesture so maternal it surprised her even as her hand moved. "We'll take it one day at a time, shall we? For now, you have a place here for as long as you need it." That night, Margaret lay awake longer than usual, her mind turning over the changes of the past week and a half. The house that had been a mausoleum to her grief was gradually becoming something else, still filled with memories, yes, but also with new sounds, new routines, new possibilities. It was disorienting, and yet, in some inexplicable way, it felt like waking up after a very long sleep. The days leading up to Christmas took on a different character than any Margaret had experienced in years. Rather than her usual solitary observance, a small tree, a few decorations, a quiet day with a book, she found herself drawn into preparations that reflected Lily's excitement. They decorated the tree together, Margaret bringing down ornaments that had been carefully packed away for years. Many had stories attached to them, and she found herself sharing these with Lily, memories of Christmases past that had been too painful to revisit alone. "Did you make this one?" Lily asked, holding up a somewhat lopsided ceramic star painted in blues and silvers. "No, that was Robert's. He took a pottery class one year and made ornaments for everyone. He wasn't very good, as you can see, but he was so proud of them." Lily handled the star with new reverence. "It's special because he made it," she said, placing it carefully on a prominent branch. They baked more cookies, some to eat and some to share with neighbors, not just Mrs. Jenkins now, but the elderly couple across the street and the young family with twins who had moved in the previous summer. Margaret found herself invited to a Christmas Eve gathering at Ellen's, something she had declined for years, and surprisingly, she accepted. "We should get you a proper dress for the party," Margaret said as they drove into town to finish some shopping. "Something festive." Lily looked both excited and uncertain. "You don't have to buy me more things?" "Nonsense. Christmas calls for something special." Margaret felt an unfamiliar lightness as they browsed the department store, eventually selecting a dark green velvet dress that made Lily's eyes shine when she tried it on. As they drove home, Lily gazed out at the holiday decorations lining the main street. "My mom loved Christmas," she said softly. "She said it was magic how everyone tried a little harder to be kind to each other." "Your mother sounds like she was very wise," Margaret said. "Do you think she'd be sad that I'm happy sometimes now, even though I miss her?" The question hung in the car, so honest and vulnerable that Margaret had to take a moment before answering. "No, sweetheart. I think she'd be grateful that you're finding moments of happiness. That's what parents want for their children, even when they can't be there to see it." "Is that what you want for Elizabeth?" Lily asked, her voice small. Margaret felt her breath catch. "Yes," she said after a moment. "That's exactly what I would want for her." On Christmas Eve, Margaret found herself in Ellen's crowded living room, surrounded by more people than she had socialized with in years. Lily stayed close to her side at first, but gradually was drawn into conversation with Ellen's grandchildren, eventually joining them in a game in the adjacent room. "It's good to see you here, Margaret," Ellen said, bringing her a cup of punch. "And Lily looks like she's settling in well with you." "She's an easy child to have around," Margaret replied, watching through the doorway as Lily laughed at something one of the other children said. The sound of her laughter, still rare enough to be remarkable, created a warm glow in Margaret's chest. "Have you given any thought to what happens next?" Ellen asked carefully. "Ms. Parker mentioned you offered to keep her through January, maybe longer." Margaret sipped her punch, considering the question. "I'm taking it one day at a time," she said finally. "Lily needs stability. I can provide that for now." Ellen nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You know, you've changed since she came. There's more light in your face." Before Margaret could respond to this observation, Lily appeared at her side, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Jenkins says she's leaving soon and wanted to say goodnight to you," she reported. "And she asked if we'd like to come for tea on Boxing Day." "Did she? Well, we'll have to check our calendar, won't we?" Margaret said, exchanging a smile with Lily at the joke. Their calendar had been notably empty before Lily's arrival. Later that night, after they returned home and Lily was tucked into bed, Margaret found herself standing before the closed door of the nursery. Her hand hovered over the knob for long moments before she finally turned it, pushing the door open for the first time in years. The air inside was stale but not musty, thanks to her occasional cleaning. Moonlight filtered through the closed curtains, casting the room in soft blue light. The crib still stood against one wall, the changing table beside it. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a small bookshelf filled with children's books nearby. Everything preserved as if waiting, frozen in time. Margaret moved to the rocking chair and sat down, her hands gripping the familiar armrests. For years, this room had represented only loss to her, a monument to dreams that would never come true. But sitting there now, rocking gently, she felt something different begin to form. Not an erasure of her grief, but perhaps a transformation of it. Elizabeth would always be her first child, the baby she had held so briefly but loved so completely. Nothing could change that. But perhaps the room itself didn't have to remain a shrine to loss. Perhaps it could be something else, a space of remembrance, yes, but also of possibility. On Christmas morning, Margaret woke to the sound of Lily moving about downstairs. She dressed quickly and descended to find the girl sitting cross-legged before the tree, examining the wrapped presents that had appeared overnight, gifts Margaret had secretly purchased and wrapped after Lily went to bed. "Merry Christmas," Margaret said from the doorway. Lily turned, her face lighting up. "Merry Christmas. I made coffee," she announced proudly. "Mrs. Jenkins showed me how when we visited. I was careful with the hot water." "That was very thoughtful," Margaret said, deeply touched by the gesture. "Shall we have some before opening presents?" They sat together on the sofa, sipping coffee, heavily diluted with milk for Lily, and looking at the tree. Outside, snow was falling again, creating a perfect Christmas card scene beyond the windows. "I have something for you too." Lily said suddenly, setting down her mug and retrieving a small, clumsily wrapped package from behind a sofa cushion. "I made it, Mrs." Jenkins helped a little. Margaret took the package, unexpectedly moved by the fact that Lily had thought to prepare a gift. Carefully unwrapping it, she found a handmade bookmark constructed from cardstock and decorated with pressed flowers, similar to the ones from Lily's card for her grandmother. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, running her finger over the delicate flowers. "Mrs. Jenkins had a flower press. We used flowers from her indoor garden," Lily explained. "I remembered you said you liked to read, but that you always lost your place." The fact that Lily had noticed this small detail, had remembered it, and created something specifically to address it, filled Margaret with a warmth she couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Lily. I'll treasure it." The rest of Christmas Day unfolded with a gentle joy that felt both new and somehow familiar to Margaret, as if she were remembering how to experience the holiday rather than learning for the first time. They opened gifts. Lily's delight at the art supplies, books, and games Margaret had chosen was reward enough, prepared a simple but special meal, and spent the afternoon playing one of the new board games before curling up with hot chocolate to read. That evening, when Lily was in bed, Margaret returned to the nursery, this time turning on the light and really looking at the room with fresh eyes. She opened the curtains, letting moonlight flood in. She ran her hand over the crib rail, the changing table, the small dresser filled with baby clothes that had never been worn. Some things she would keep, she decided. The rocking chair, the bookshelf, but perhaps the rest could be transitioned. Not discarded, but transformed, just as her grief was slowly transforming in Lily's presence. The last week of December passed in a blur of small pleasures. They visited Mrs. Jenkins for tea, went sledding on the hill behind the house, baked bread on a particularly cold day. Margaret found herself laughing more than she had in years, her body remembering the feel of joy the way muscles remember movements long unpracticed. New Year's Eve arrived with another snowfall. They spent the evening playing games and watching the television countdown, though Lily fell asleep on the sofa well before midnight. Rather than wake her, Margaret simply covered her with a blanket and sat beside her, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing as the old year slipped away and the new one began. In the quiet moment, with the child sleeping peacefully beside her, Margaret allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that had been forming over the past weeks. She didn't want Lily to leave. The thought of returning to her solitary existence, of the house falling silent again, created an ache she couldn't ignore. But what right did she have to want such a thing? She was nearly 70, a woman who had lived alone for 15 years, whose experience with motherhood had been tragically brief. Was it fair to Lily, who deserved a family who could offer her decades of support, to consider anything more permanent? These questions followed Margaret into the new year, lurking beneath the continued routines and small joys of their days together. January brought the restart of school, and Margaret found herself driving Lily each morning, watching her walk into the building with a mixture of pride and anxiety that felt instinctively maternal. One evening in mid-January, as Margaret helped Lily with a science project about the water cycle, the phone rang. It was Ms. Parker, the social worker. "I wanted to update you on Lily's situation," she said after the initial pleasantries. "The family in Harrisburg is ready to take her at the beginning of February. They have 2 other foster children, both girls around Lily's age, and they've been foster parents for over a decade with excellent reviews." "I see," Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral even as she felt something collapse inside her. "That sounds like a good placement." "It is, Ms." Parker agreed. "They live near a good school, and the mother is a part-time teacher's aide, so she's home when the children return from school. I think Lily would adjust well there." "I'm sure she would," Margaret said, watching as Lily concentrated on coloring her diagram at the kitchen table, unaware that her future was being discussed. "Unless, Ms." Parker began, then paused. "Margaret, Ellen has mentioned that you and Lily have formed quite a bond. She wondered, and I admit I'm curious as well, whether you might have considered a more permanent arrangement." Margaret's heart lurched. More permanent? Foster care, perhaps even adoption eventually if that was something you both wanted. Lily's grandmother has legal custody but is willing to transfer it if Lily would be in a stable, loving home. She wants what's best for her granddaughter. I'm nearly 70, Margaret said, the words coming out more as a question than a statement. "Yes, and in perfect health from what Ellen tells me." You have a safe home, financial stability, and most importantly, you've already shown that you can provide Lily with the emotional support she needs during an extremely difficult time. Ms. Parker's voice softened. Age isn't the only factor we consider, Margaret. Sometimes the right home isn't the most obvious one on paper. Would I need to decide immediately? The Harrisburg placement doesn't need an answer until the end of the month. Take some time to think about it. Talk to Lily, see how she feels. This would be a significant commitment for both of you. After hanging up, Margaret stood by the phone, her mind racing. Could she really do this? Become a mother, a grandmother, really, at her age? The idea both terrified and exhilarated her. Who was on the phone? Lily asked, looking up from her project. Ms. Parker, Margaret answered, moving back to the table. She was calling with an update. About where I'm going next? Lily's voice was careful, her eyes returning to her coloring, though Margaret noticed her hand had stilled. Yes, there's a family in Harrisburg who might be able to take you in February. They sound very nice. They have 2 girls about your age. Lily nodded, adding another careful line of blue to represent rainfall in her diagram. That's good. But, Margaret took a deep breath, there might be another option, if you were interested. Now Lily looked up, her expression cautious but attentive. You could stay here, Margaret said, with me, not just temporarily but as a more permanent arrangement. If that was something you wanted? Lily's eyes widened. You mean, live here? For real? Yes. I would become your foster mother officially, and perhaps in time, if we both felt it was right, something more permanent than that. You'd adopt me? Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. It's a possibility we could consider, yes. But Lily, Margaret reached across the table to take the girl's hand. This is a big decision. For both of us. You should take time to think about what you want. There's no pressure. Lily was silent for a long moment, her eyes moving around the kitchen as if seeing it with new perspective. Would I have to call you Mom? She finally asked. The question surprised a small laugh from Margaret. No, sweetheart. You had a mother who loved you very much. You can continue to call me Margaret or whatever feels right to you. Lily nodded, considering this. And we would still read together? And bake cookies? Of course. Those things wouldn't change. What about... Lily hesitated, then continued in a rush. What about the room across from mine? Would it still stay closed? Margaret felt a tightening in her throat. Actually, I've been thinking about that room. I think it's time for some changes there. It's been closed for too long. What kind of changes? I'm not entirely sure yet, Margaret admitted, but I thought perhaps you might help me decide. It could become whatever we wanted it to be. A study, perhaps. Or a place for your art projects. Or something else entirely. Lily absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. I'd like that, she said finally. Helping you decide. They returned to the science project, the conversation set aside but not forgotten. Over the next few days, neither mentioned it directly, though Margaret noticed Lily watching her sometimes with a speculative expression, as if trying to imagine what a future together might look like. A week later, as they were walking home from a visit to the library, Lily's hand firmly clasped in Margaret's against the January cold, the girl broke their comfortable silence. I've been thinking about your question, she said. About staying with you. Margaret's heart quickened. And what have you been thinking? Lily was quiet for a few steps, her breath forming small clouds in the winter air. I miss my mom a lot, she said finally. And my grandma too, even though she's still here. I'll always miss them. Of course you will, Margaret said gently. But I think maybe people can have room in their hearts for new people too, even after really sad things happen. Lily looked up at Margaret, her eyes serious. Like how you had room in your heart for me, even though you lost Elizabeth and your husband. Margaret felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's very true, Lily. So I think I'd like to stay with you, the girl continued. If you still want me to? They had stopped walking now, standing in the middle of the snowy sidewalk. Margaret knelt down, ignoring the cold seeping through her coat, to look Lily directly in the eyes. I would like that very much, she said, her voice thick with feeling. More than I can say. Lily nodded, a small smile forming. Me too. That evening, Margaret called Ms. Parker to begin the process of becoming Lily's foster mother, with the intention of adoption in the future. There would be paperwork, home studies, interviews, a bureaucratic journey that would take months to complete. But the decision itself, once made, felt utterly right to Margaret, as if a puzzle piece had finally slid into place. The following Saturday, Margaret and Lily stood together at the door of the nursery. "Are you ready?" Margaret asked, her hand on the doorknob. Lily nodded, her expression solemn with the importance of the moment. Together they entered the room that had been preserved in grief for so many years. "It's a nice room," Lily said, looking around at the pale yellow walls, the small white furniture, the stuffed animals arranged on a shelf. "It feels peaceful." "It does now," Margaret agreed. "For a long time it just felt sad to me. But you're right, there is peace here too." They spent the morning going through the room together. Some things Margaret knew she would always keep. The tiny knitted cap Elizabeth had worn, the blanket with her name embroidered in one corner, the photograph of Margaret holding her daughter during their brief time together. These were placed in a special box that would be kept but not hidden away. Other items, the crib, the changing table, most of the baby clothes, would be donated to a women's shelter in the next town. "Someone else can use them now," Margaret explained. "Someone who needs them for their baby." By afternoon, the room was transformed, not completely empty, but open in a way it hadn't been for decades. The rocking chair remained, as did the bookshelf. Margaret had moved her desk from the downstairs study up to one wall, and they had brought in a small table where Lily could work on art projects. "It's like a brand new room," Lily said, spinning in the center, arms outstretched. "But also still special because of Elizabeth." "Yes," Margaret agreed, watching the child who had somehow helped her find a way to honor her grief without being consumed by it. "That's exactly right." That night, after Lily was asleep, Margaret sat in the rocking chair in the transformed room, looking out at the winter stars. She thought about the strange, unpredictable paths life took, how loss could lead to isolation, but also sometimes to unexpected new beginnings. How a child needing temporary shelter could become the key to unlocking a heart that had been closed for too long. In the quiet darkness, Margaret whispered a thank you to Robert, to Elizabeth, to whatever forces had brought Lily into her life. Their family would be unconventional, perhaps, a fostered bond rather than one of blood, but it would be real and precious nonetheless. Outside, a cardinal landed briefly on the snowy branch of the oak tree beside the window, its red plumage vivid against the white landscape. Margaret smiled, remembering Lily's words about cardinals being visitors from loved ones. Perhaps there was truth in that after all. Perhaps her lost loved ones had found a way to guide her toward healing, toward a new kind of family she had never expected to find. The cardinal flew away, but Margaret continued rocking, filled with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate with Lily. Their journey together was just beginning. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to know that a house that had held so much grief for so long was filling, day by day, with something else entirely, the quiet miracle of second chances, the gentle healing power of love.